Here we go. So welcome everyone. This is our second virtual cooking workshop for San Jose State University residents. We are partnering for a second time with WHISK. So a few words about our cooking workshop. The idea is to organize student-led workshops in which students cook simple recipes with healthy ingredients, cheap ingredients, that can be purchased around campus to help residents build their cooking skills. And some students can log in live, and some other students can watch this later. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Jamie Kubota, which is a professor here within the Department of Nutrition, Food Science, and Packaging. And I'll let her introduce WHISK. Jamie is also the director of WHISK.
Thank you, Etienne. Yes, so WHISK is a new program on campus, and you said exactly what we do. We provide student-led cooking demonstrations and nutrition education for our campus community. So it gives our nutrition students an opportunity to go out into the field and practice what they're learning in the classroom. So tonight we have with us 4 senior nutrition students. Laurne Farro, who's going to be leading. Nandini, Alyssa, and Ryan, I believe, are all on the call as well. So feel free to ask questions, put things into the chat. You can also unmute. This is rather informal, and ask questions as we go along about cooking, about nutrition, about health and wellness. We're here for you, so please feel free to engage as much as you can, and we're looking forward to this. Thank you so much.
All right, Laura.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Etienne. Yeah, so tonight, Alyssa, Nandini, and Ryan and I, Lauren, have gone through and we created a couple recipes just mostly because we wanted to do a single pot meal. And I know that like sometimes in a dorm room, you're at a limited facility where you might not have a ton of tools. So this one just utilizes a single pot, a mug, and a microwave. So we have a single pot chili, which is pretty typical. This specific chili we chose because it was lower in fat, higher in fiber, and had sort of a nutritional appeal to it. But chili, being as versatile as it is, can be, I mean, you can add anything to it and make it as healthy or unhealthy as you want. In this case, I'm gonna start out with some basic cutting techniques, and I wanted to share it here. You'll see on this, I've already started with an onion. The reason I'm sharing this is because I've been cooking for several years, and when I took Professor Kubota's class the first time, she taught us how to cut an onion, and I was shocked. I kind of felt silly that I didn't know how to do it. So in this case, it's really easy. It holds everything together. You just do one simple slice down the center from tail to nose. And so we want to cut off the pointy part on both halves and leave this stem because that helps hold it together. So I'm just going to start off with a claw. That was also something we learned in class that I didn't ever utilize before. So you can kind of see where you're holding everything back. No thumbs or fingers are stuck in the center of it. So you're going to cut off the tail and peel off your outer layers. I'm going a little deep with this, but sometimes I get a little weird about outer skins. So you do that to both sides because this recipe calls for a whole medium-sized onion. Now the onion, the meat, and the oil are going to start out in the pan. And in this case, the recipe calls for olive oil. But a lot of times if I'm frying something, I skip olive oil because it can tend to change the flavor. Olive oil is really good for cold foods and medium heat, but if you get a little too hot, you can spoil that oil. So in this case, I'm going to go up to a medium-high heat and use just a spray cooking oil. This one's canola. I'm going to get the meat started. We're using a lean ground turkey in this recipe. You could use beef if you prefer it. The reason we chose this in this instance was because it's lower in fat, still high in protein, and has a lot of nutritional value with that, especially if you're watching how much fat you're eating. So again, I'm going to use my claw here. It's harder at this angle because I'm right-handed. But what we do is we're going to take this knife and go through and go for, you want your cubes to be about the same size. So I'm going to start with my claw. I'm avoiding the claw.
Lauren, is there any reason to prefer spray to regular bottles of canola oil?
I just do it because it's easy.
Yeah.
Honestly, it says 2 tablespoons of olive oil, which is fine. Sometimes I tend to get a little bit too liberal with the oil. So I feel like with the spray, it gives me like quick coverage and not using too much.
Yeah.
Are you cooking there? Is it already going, Lauren?
Yes, I have it on a medium to high heat here. And you want to start it out. I've got it kind of low just to get ready because I wanted to prepare this onion and I kind of wanted to show it off a little bit because I really appreciated that learning how to cut an onion.
Oh, it looks good.
So as this cooks, you know, again, the reason we kind of stuck with the garbanzo bean turkey chili was because it's kind of a lower calorie chili in comparison to what you'll find out there. And it still had a fair amount of flavor. Missed a couple here. So when I made this last night in a pre-run, chili is one of those recipes that kind of gets better the longer you let it cook. And so it makes really good leftovers. And if you are somebody who's living alone or living in a dorm, this is something that you could share with a fair amount of people. But you could also meal prep this as well and put it into jars or Tupperware and save it in the fridge for, 4 to 5 days. So if you did this on a Monday night like tonight, you could have lunch or dinner throughout the week.
Is it possible to freeze it for students that might have access to a freezer?
Absolutely. In fact, being I made it last night, that's what I plan to do, is to put it in single serve packs and just have it in there so that I could take it with me. So as this heats up, this is a good time to salt and pepper it. And, as the saying goes, you just kind of salt and pepper to taste. So for me, I kind of, from cooking for as long as I have, I just kind of know what I like. But the glory of that is you can always salt and pepper it at the end as well.
Is this recipe compatible with different types of
What was that?
onions? Could you use like a purple or a red or a yellow onion here or green onions? Is there a favorite, or are they all pretty good?
I save my green onions for the end. I'll top it. But as far as red or yellow onions or purple, you could use whatever you like. And again, that's kind of the cool part about chili, is any one of these ingredients are fairly interchangeable. It's the spices that carry it. So in this recipe, we have just a basic chili powder. We're using cumin and oregano, which are kind of like typical Southwestern spices. They give you that smoky flavor and that red color, So that's what we were going for with this.
It looks great.
Yeah, cumin is a great one to have, I think, for students who don't have like maybe a whole rack in their room, but it's a good way to like give flavor. It's not expensive. You can just have it in your little bottle.
I agree, Etienne. I bought mine at Grocery Outlet. And again, you're going to hear that, I think, everything I bought at Grocery Outlet. But it is like, if I make tacos, if I make chili, if I make anything, you know, I make stuffed bell peppers every once in a while, and cumin goes in every one of those. For me, it really adds a lot of flavor. So as this browns, I'm gonna chop up some garlic. If you have a garlic press, you can peel your garlic or not. In this case, I'm assuming a lot of people might not have a garlic press. So what I find to be the easiest way to get through my garlic is to take my big knife and smash it. But you got to be really careful because you don't want to cut yourself, obviously. And I found my best luck to start with the palm of my hand on the back of the blade and just push forward. And it smashes it apart really easy, so I'm not wrestling the garlic. Scrap bowls are also nice to have when you're doing like a big meal, so that you don't have to keep reaching in and out of the garbage can, which can kind of be a sanitation thing.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
And then again, just with your garlic, it's not as much like the onion where you're not looking for uniform pieces. I just keep my hand on the back and roll the blade across it and just get little pieces. I know it's a little bit far away for you guys to see. And I hope it's not getting too steamy.
No, we can see the pot quite well.
Okay, great. So I do, in the recipe, it suggests to drain the fat. I used a leaner turkey, which really didn't yield that much fat. And sometimes when it's a big hot pan, it's not really worth worrying about. I do every once in a while take a handle of my pan and tilt it, and I'll just scrape everything to one side and let it drain, and have sort of like a grease jar or some sort of receptacle to spoon it out. Because with a big pan like this, it's a little hard to get that grease out and drained.
Lauren, are we able to substitute the turkey for maybe like Impossible meat or Beyond Meat?
Yeah, actually, that's a great idea, Alyssa. If you're vegetarian or vegan, that's a quick way to change this recipe and make it accommodate your needs. Another thing about that is last night when I made it for myself, I had some mushrooms and other things sitting around the kitchen that I kind of diced up and threw into it just to add more vegetables into it, which is always an option if you like more vegetables.
That was going to be my question is, you know, could you take the same recipe and just bump? Just add beans in and make it all like a bean chili?
Yeah. You know, throwing in black beans and kidney beans, you know, corn is another one that I always like to throw in chili. I feel like corn gives it a little bit of a sweetness and texture change. Again, this is a cool recipe because a lot of it's based on preference. You know, if you don't have any skill or, you know, you're not that comfortable changing recipes, it's a great start. But you can add anything to this and make it yummy. I know the WHISK website has a couple different variations of chili that's seasonal where you can throw squash or pumpkin in. And that might require you to cook it, where you could put your leftover vegetables again. Like if you're down at the commons, like the dining area, and you have extra vegetables that are cooked or steamed there, you can carry it over and throw it in the chili. And it's really like, again, a good way to sort of add more fiber and more, you know, just vegetables in general. So now that I've got this fully browned, like I mentioned, there's really not much grease draining off of this or oil coming out of it. So I'm going to let it be. You want to let that garlic sit in there a little bit so that you don't have, you know, when you get garlic a little undercooked, it can be a little spicy or a little much.
What heat? Medium heat or
I turned this. I kept it at a medium high just to get it going. And right now I turned it down to a lower temperature. So I'm right around medium, because once we add everything else in, it's going to want to simmer. So you want to keep that heat up, but you don't want to burn it, especially if you do have to look away. So one of the things that I'm going to turn this a little bit lower. So the recipe has you add, once you've done all that, you're going to add your spices. And in here I have cumin, oregano, and chili powder. And I like to stir that in. And now I'm going to add the tomatoes to kind of, you'll notice at the bottom of the pan where things start sticking, the juice in the tomatoes kind of helps deglaze and lift all that off of the pan. And just a little note, the recipe called for 28-ounce cans. I even found myself walking through the store looking for 28-ounce cans. It's the same as 2 average size cans. So you just, you know, when you start adding up how many cans of food are in here, it's a lot. So I would suggest, you know, this is a great, great meal prepping meal.
I was going to ask you, Lauren, let us say that I don't have chili powder, but I have paprika or even smoked paprika. Do you think that you can use that also, or is that going to change things too much?
You can. It will change your flavor profile a little bit, you know, but I do think that one of the best resources that we have now is Google. I go there all the time to substitute ingredients. Now, I didn't prepare these peppers either because I really wanted to go through this as well. I always struggled with cutting and fishing all the seeds out of peppers, and it seems silly, but when you find yourself doing it, it's kind of a real struggle. So I always, again, I think this is something I learned from Professor Kubota: cut off the top, cut off the bottom, and you can cut that in half. And here you can really easily fish everything out of the center. And you have easier pieces to work with. So we'll cut these into little strips with our claw. And then again this way.
Yeah, that's a good tip too. I know I learned something tonight.
You know, the chopping in one of our food production courses we take as nutrition students, it was one of the most helpful classes, you know, because you pick up habits along the way. And, you know, when you're cooking in your own kitchen for a long time, you pick up bad habits. You know, we're not professionals by any means. It's fine. But, you know, these were just little helpful tips that I really wanted to share because they meant a lot to me.
Yeah, I'm really impressed. I don't think anyone like taught me to cut anything except meat. So like tackling these vegetables, my mind is blown.
Well, Professor Kubota is kind of a kitchen wizard for all of us. So I do say, like, even at, you know, 32 coming into her class, I learned a lot.
Awesome. That's so nice to hear.
Professor Kubota is writing on the chat. I want to say out loud for those who will be watching this later that if you're using smoked paprika instead of chili powders, might be a good idea to also use hot sauce if you like things hot, to kind of add flavors to it. And I want to stress also, I think Lauren gave a really good tip, right? Like Googling ingredients when you're not sure if you can substitute one. I think that's a really important tip because often students might think, I don't have all the ingredients, so I can't cook the recipe, but there's a lot of things that you can just modify and tweak. So if you're missing one ingredient, that doesn't mean you can't cook, right? You can just try it a different way and maybe it's going to be as good.
Absolutely. I like to hear that because, you know, I tend to get trapped in my own kitchen and in our own cooking ways. And since I've been working with WHISK and Professor Kubota, I've actually referenced her website a lot and her recipes because you get kind of stuck. And if you don't think to sort of reach outside your own comfort zone, you kind of miss a lot.
Do any of you want to share the URL of the website for those of you who are watching this later, and so that they can easily find it?
Yeah, I think we did earlier, but it's really easy. I'll put it in the chat. It's just sjsu.edu/whisk, as in kitchen whisk. So sjsu.edu/whisk. And we post all the recipes that we use for our demos that go on our Instagram, etc. Yeah, we're also on Instagram. So at WHISK_SJSU. And then we have kind of a partner program called CHOP, which is cooking healthy for optimal performance, kind of geared towards our athletic community. And that's at CHOP_SJSU. So all of those provide really easy, convenient, budget-friendly recipes for busy college students.
I will say that I've been, I think the CHOP program that she has going is great, because some of us have to do these, as nutrition students, will seek out student athletes and do nutritional analysis and nutritional profile for them. And it doesn't always go hand in hand. You know, students are still students, and you're busy, and you don't have, you know, you feel you don't have the time, and maybe you don't have much of an education with what your body needs. And that's been a really helpful resource, I think, for students. I hope everybody's utilizing that needs it.
Yeah, and the idea of cooking like one time for multiple meals is also like a very good tip, I think. You know, with the pot that you're cooking, if you're alone, you can eat that for a couple dinners or lunch. For students that don't have a meal plan that covers every meal, you can rely on that for when you don't want to wipe or something like that.
Absolutely. It's really helpful, you know, because you can see this is a substantial amount of food, especially if you're one person. And you know, this would probably make more than a week's worth of dinner or lunch or whatever you want to interchange it with. And so, like you had mentioned before, having some freezer bags handy and throwing it in the freezer, you know, because if you did make this a vegetarian meal, there is one thing that I would like to highlight is the meat kind of makes it a complete protein, you know, and when you're an athlete, that might be something that's a little more important to you, making sure that you're getting adequate protein. So when you add the meat in there, or if you added rice, even another carbohydrate to kind of bulk it up, that'll help make sure that you get a complete protein meal. So I'm going to set this aside because I think I'm done with that.
And I think this is one of those things too, Lauren, that just gets better and better as it sits, right? So tomorrow it's going to be even better. So it's not only is it good because of the quantity, but because of the type of food it is, it lends itself to meal prepping.
Absolutely. It does get better. The longer you let it cook, the longer it sits in the fridge, it gets soupier. It turns, like, the sauce gets a little richer. So here you can see it's a little dry. And so we add 2 cups of chicken broth. And again, if you were going to change this to where you didn't want meat in it and you were going to use, you know, like Impossible or the Incognito or any of those type of things that are coming out, you could substitute that for vegetable broth. It's really just to sort of thicken it up. Or not thicken it up, but sort of give it a base to melt into.
And those substitutes are really becoming, I eat meat, and for a long time I thought that the meat substitute were not amazing, but the recent one I've tasted are like really different than the first one that came out. So like the Impossible burgers, and also there's a sausage that I don't know what the precise name is, but for those of you who just want to try to eat less meat or just try something different, it's worth it.
I would say that I use them quite frequently because my husband has gone vegan. The rest of us have not, but my husband has. And so we try to accommodate his preferences. Impossible also has now like a ground meat out. So they were selling just their burgers, but they have a ground meat that you can use in place of hamburger. It looks just like hamburger and it works really well. Yeah, a lot of the newer non-meat proteins are actually quite good.
I just tried that one recently, and that one's by far my favorite because I've tried the Beyond Meat before, and it's personally not my favorite. So I think the Impossible meat is really good. It's probably the closest to like regular meat.
Hmm. I have to say that my kids and I don't eat it as much. I usually make 2 of everything, but it's not bad. It's not bad. I personally, if I'm going to go meatless, I just prefer to have like beans or lentils or something else that's just a plant-based protein. So we do a lot of that as well.
I agree with that, Professor Kubota. I tend to worry sometimes about the processing of the meat substitutes, or just really maybe as a nutrition student, hyper concerned where I probably shouldn't be. But I do think about that. So we often like try to seek out things like, we always joke about rice and beans being like a good complete protein, because if you source different types of plant protein and combine them, you'll often find that you'll end up with a complete protein.
Mm-hmm.
Rice and beans are like a good one. That's why I suggested throwing rice in here.
Well, the other thing is those plant-based proteins are not all of them, but the new ones like Impossible and the others are actually pretty expensive. So if you are on a budget, using the actual plants, so beans and lentils are going to be a little bit more budget friendly.
Yeah, I didn't really think about that. I haven't been purchasing them, so I didn't really take a look at that, but it's good to know.
What kind of other beans could be used in that recipe? I'm asking all the nutritionists in the room.
I always prefer black beans. I know black beans are high in vitamin B, because I know garbanzo beans isn't a complete protein. So we could always add maybe like black beans, maybe even like kidney beans.
I was thinking lentils would also be a good addition as well.
I tend to do things, I like black beans in some ways and I like white beans in other ways. I feel like they give a different feel to the dish. Like when you add white beans to a turkey chili or a chicken chili, it just makes it feel lighter. And then when you're using the black beans, it resembles more of a darker meat, like a red meat. So it just has a different feel to it. So I kind of like to use them separately. And it really just changes the flavor profile to me.
Yeah, good.
One thing I love about this dish is the color. It's so vibrant, and like the autumn vibes that are stemming. I mean, I know California doesn't really have autumn, but to the extent that leaves change color, like I think this dish represents that, which is a very fun dish.
It did feel like fall today. It finally got cold, so perfect fall dish.
Oh yeah, it's the
Yeah.
perfect.
I think this dish is like very perfect for our current weather, and like for the fall season, it's also perfect for the upcoming holidays. Even if, just to make it yourself, you could just have a few people over, and then, just it's something easy and quick to make.
I guess this is a dish you could say you could fall for.
Good one.
On that note, this is kind of typical, but I love cornbread with it. And cornbread can kind of, I found it in a couple different ways where I've made like intense homemade recipes that come out maybe not as good as I expected, or I end up with a box that comes out perfect, but it has 1,000 ingredients in it, most of which I don't know what they are or care to eat really. So the girls and I were looking for a quick recipe that was sort of easy that you could make in a microwave, kind of like our last thing. So we found this recipe it's pretty neat. It's limited ingredients. It's with the exception of milk, it's all plant. So if you had a oat milk or almond milk or a different kind of milk you wanted to substitute in there, you could quickly make it a vegan recipe. It's also super versatile. So being it's a mug mill or a mug cake, I have a mug ready, and I was just gonna oil it because these cakes tend to stick in there, and I used the same oil that I used in the pan. And I realized I forgot to get a little bowl. So in here, like everybody else's kitchen, there's stuff in every bowl. I've got it's a really simple recipe, and it's just, it's one thing I found about it. We're using white cornmeal. You could really use any cornmeal. You could use blue. You could even use a cornmeal that's kind of like a coarse ground cornmeal, because they have them in, you know, this is a really sort of fine ground one.
That's just pure cornmeal, not cornbread mix, right?
Exactly. It's just plain cornmeal. And this one, the recipe called for white, so I just went with white cornmeal. And it does have baking powder in it. And it called for a 1/4 teaspoon, which seemed like a lot in this. And it didn't rise much when I made it. It was like a really dense corn cake, almost like a hard polenta that you buy in the tube. So I, you know, didn't go for quite full teaspoon. I also thought it might, Professor Kubota, you might be able to answer this. Does too much baking powder create bitterness?
So baking powder and baking soda, yes, do have a flavor to them, particularly baking soda. If you don't have an acidic ingredient and you add too much of it, you get this really soapy taste, which is not pleasant. So you want to be careful with it, but I think that's probably about right. It sounds right to me, about a 1/4 teaspoon in that amount.
Well, it feels better to hear that, because it seemed like a lot and I was, you know, worried about it, but
if you make a
I'll
full
take your
batch
word.
of cornbread, like a 9 by 9 inch pan, which would be kind of a typical recipe, you'd probably be using 2 teaspoons to a tablespoon of baking soda or baking powder, sorry, because it's the primary leavener, right? There isn't any other leavener going in really.
no.
And cornmeal is a little bit heavier than using flour. Cornmeal is going to be a whole grain, so that's awesome in that regard. You're bumping up your whole grains by doing like a cornbread or adding cornmeal into your bread.
Yeah, that was an aspect we forgot to highlight there. Something else that we were putting into this, instead of using sugar, we were using applesauce. And I got these little applesauce packets because you just open this little applesauce thing and you can screw the cap on and store it for a day or 2 in the fridge. That way it kind of reduces waste, but you're also not adding a ton of sugar to it.
Yeah, that's a
And
good.
applesauce is great for using as an egg substitute. I mean, I use it all the time for baking. So it definitely, for me, I feel like it increases, like, you know, the flavor of the applesauce, and it makes it more fluffy, which is for me more enjoyable. So about like 1 cup of applesauce is like equivalent to like 2 eggs. So I just find it pretty useful to just have it around the house.
I was going to say you can replace oil too. So if you're making like a quick bread, a pumpkin bread or something like that, you can replace some of the oil with applesauce instead and lower the fat content that way. And you get that flavor and the moisture from the apples.
Yeah, that's another thing we learned tonight. Applesauce is magical.
It has a lot to offer. It's our sweetener and our egg in this. I am adding a little bit of oil. It's 2 teaspoons. And then there's a tablespoon and a third of milk, which is essentially a tablespoon and a teaspoon. And there's no real tricks to this. You know, once you mix your cornmeal and your baking powder together, you can put your oil, your milk, and your applesauce in. And you'll see you're going to get sort of a dense paste. And it mixes fairly quickly.
I like the fact that you chose a baking recipe. If you're like me, you're not afraid of cooking, but I'm still very afraid of baking because you can't control it and adjust it as much. So I think it's really good to have simple baking recipes to like break the ice and maybe incite some students that have never baked before to try, you know, cook a cornbread and build from there.
Yeah, I can definitely vouch for the fact that just because you're a cook doesn't mean you're a baker.
We've had this conversation in my classes before. So I'm actually trained as a pastry chef, and I love to bake, but you can be you have to be precise when you bake. Baking is a matter of following ratios and using very precise techniques. And there's a lot of really small work that happens, and it can be a little bit redundant. And a lot of cooks don't like that. But, you know, you can also be that way when you're cooking. You can be very precise when you're cooking, and it's not a problem. It's a problem if you're not precise when you bake, but it's the other way around, doesn't matter. So oftentimes bakers will cook, but cooks don't like to bake. So you'll see pastry chefs that are actually quite good in the kitchen and do well on things like chop. But on the other hand, usually the chefs or the savory cooks have a little bit of trouble with baking.
Yeah, it definitely has a science aspect to it that's hard to grasp for some of us. In this recipe in particular, last night when I made it, it was really dense. And so I started adding corn to it. And I had noticed that when I asked Alyssa, we were talking about all the different ideas, and she threw in, like, you could throw in jalapenos, you could throw in cheese. There's a lot of different things that you could just kind of toss into this. And I'm just using a tablespoon because it's such a small recipe. So I threw in like a tablespoon of corn to give a little bit of texture and just mixed it right in.
And that's frozen corn, right? You just pull that out of your freezer and you're throwing it in frozen. Perfect.
Exactly. And I was, you know, I didn't try it last night, but I was curious about like creamed corn, because I've had creamed corn recipes where you make your cornbread with a can of creamed corn. So in here, I just sort of flattened it to the bottom. And this is a real easy one because then I'm putting it in the microwave for 60 seconds and it's pretty much done. And I say pretty much because I put butter and honey on top of it because it just tastes better that way.
100.
You don't need to do like intervals for this microwave cornbread compared to like the banana bread recipe that we did.
No, this one I got lucky on. It was a solid minute and it was done. And as long as I oiled the mug, it popped right out. So hopefully tonight that'll be the same. And then this is kind of, I brought it up to a boil and then covered it and lowered the temperature down to medium. You can see it looks really vibrant still, but if you put this in a Tupperware tomorrow, it'll look more like your traditional chili in a sauce. It kind of blends down.
This chili looks very good.
With this, I've been making sure to use handled mugs. You could throw it in any bowl, but these cakes that like last meeting that we did, and then for this demo, this cornbread's pretty hot in there. So you don't really want to go grab it. You want to have like a little oven mitt or at least a handle on the mug if you can. And I'm going to throw it on a plate just to show that it actually comes out pretty solid. So you have a little cornbread cake.
It does look like polenta.
It does. It has that same texture.
I bet it's delicious with the chili. I was going to say, you know, one of the things about microwave cooking, it's super convenient, but you don't get the browning that you get in an oven. So you're never going to get that little brown crust on there that you would get in an oven. I think that's why it resembles polenta so much.
Absolutely. It definitely didn't brown. It is more like polenta. It's even on the top, you can see it dries out a little, but it has a really dense texture. So I just buttered mine a little bit and then just honey over it. And honestly, I found it kind of works best if you like to break up your cornbread into your chili. Some people like to eat it on the side like a biscuit, but I always kind of break it up into it. And if you go to grocery outlet, this is my favorite thing. It's squeezy honey. It's all natural, but you don't have to put a spoon in it or anything. And it makes it really easy to just sort of, well, I'll leave it there and let it rest, but it just drizzles right on top. And so now, you know, again, like we said with chili, it gets better with time, but you could turn this off and stir it up and serve it as is with your cornbread. And I put this cornbread on a plate, which isn't the best idea for chili, but.
Lauren, going back to the chili recipe, can you cook it in a slow cooker instead of a pot?
Chili is really cool like that. As long, like, my one suggestion to that is you're going to want to pan fry your meat first, especially if you're using beef. You're going to get a lot of fat to drain off of it. But once you've browned your meat, you could throw it into a slow cooker, or if you have an instant pot, and put all the ingredients in there and close it up and leave it, and it comes out perfect. In fact, it's kind of like the ideal way to cook chili for me.
Can I ask you, well, you mentioned browning your meat. So for unexperienced cook, what's the purpose of that, of browning your meat?
Well, there's a big, for me, it's comfort in the sanitation aspect. Like, I like to cook, you don't have to do that with every meat, but with ground meat, it's a little more vulnerable. So I like to get it up to a high temperature and then drain the meat. So it's kind of like that twofold, a food safety factor and a drain factor. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of grease floating on top. Maybe not so much with turkey or chicken, but definitely with beef. So I think, you know, I'm not very well versed with the Impossible Burger or any of that type of meat substitute. Maybe somebody else could sort of comment on that. I don't know if you would have to brown that before throwing it in.
So technically you could, if you didn't have an opportunity to brown it, or, you know, you didn't have a stovetop, you could technically put it all into the crock pot and let it cook together. And it would get up to high enough temperature that it, for food safety reasons, like Lauren's saying, you want to make sure that it's thoroughly cooked. It will thoroughly cook over that process. So you can do that. But browning it adds a level of flavor that you can't get from not browning it, right? So if you have the time and you have the resources and the equipment to brown it, you're going to want to brown your meat and maybe even cook off your onions and your aromatics, so the onions and the garlic together, just to add in an extra layer of flavor. But you certainly don't have to. This could be one of your dump meals where you just dump everything in, let it cook, and it will still be delicious, right? And we all need some of those meals. We all need to have, some days you just don't have time, and you know that you've got a busy week, a busy night, and you really need to be able to come home to something healthy and delicious. So having a few of those, I call them dump meals, that you can just dump in the crock pot and go, is really important. So this could be that way, but you can add in that extra level of flavor by browning the meat, and then, you know, hopefully browning your onions and your garlic, and you can even throw in your spices and toast them off, and it's just going to bump up the flavor.
Yeah, that's very good. I think also this concept of dump meals, because let's say you're in a collective kitchen, like in one of the dorms, and a lot of people are cooking. Maybe you can't like occupy a burner for like an hour or something like that. So you can just like prepare your things on like in your workspace and then dump that. And when it's ready to cook, you just cook it. Although like if you do it like Lauren did it, then you can brown it. And then as Professor Kubota was saying, maybe you can add a little bit of flavor. It all looks delicious, I have to say.
This question.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was thinking of other things you can do with this, because we're serving this with cornmeal. You can serve it in a bowl, eat it, you know, straight up. I was thinking like a chili dog would be an amazing little lunch for me, to put some of this over a hot dog. I don't eat hot dogs often, but if I'm going to eat one, this would be amazing to me to have like a chili dog. Or I was even thinking over a baked potato. This for me would be like comfort food over a baked potato. Or Lauren brought up earlier rice, putting it on top of rice. Yeah, I can see so many different ways to turn this into a meal.
Definitely. And this question might be a little cheesy, but for those of us who love cheddar or like Monterey Jack, when would we put that into this component or to this dish?
I like to do that when I'm serving it. Usually if I was making this for my family, I would have, you know, avocado and cheese, maybe sour cream, things set up to throw on top of it. Because it's one of those meals that it's cool to dress it up. You know, it just adds a lot of flavor to it. And this one's kind of more traditional, where despite being turkey and garbanzo beans, like the flavor of a traditional chili is there. So, you know, once you serve it, throw that cheese on to let it melt, and that would be perfect.
Great, thanks.
You know, that's honestly a really good point, is when you do serve it though, that's a good time to add things. I always go for cheese, but you could add green onions, avocado, diced tomatoes, a lot of different vegetable components that you'd prefer fresh and might get a little bit more flavor out of. But by all means, sour cream and the standards are great on it too.
I was just thinking Greek yogurt. We usually use Greek yogurt, not sour cream. So a big dollop of Greek yogurt would make it nice and creamy too.
Well, thanks so much, Lauren. Am I right to think those was the 2 recipes that you had prepared for us tonight, right?
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for the cooking demo. I really liked this one. I wish I could eat it right now, in fact. So before we bring the cooking workshop to an end, can I ask anyone else if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask, or any nutrition student would like to add anything about the recipe that Lauren cooked? Walter says, is there a way to send this meal to us virtually? No, unfortunately, I don't think Zoom technology, Walter, has reached that level yet, although I do wish that.
If only. I have so much chili in the house now.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying you could 3D print it. They're coming out with that technology. They are 3D printing chocolates, which is pretty cool.
Really? That's
Yep.
amazing.
And they're doing it actually on campus. So in the design department, she works in the design department, and I guess that's part of architecture. I had to look it up. There is a professor who's actually doing research on it, and a lot of work in that area. And she's been 3D printing a lot of different things, but also some chocolate and I believe tea. Who knew?
Well, maybe one day we'll have a fur faculty and residence WHISK workshop about 3D printing chocolate, but
yes, please, please. We should actually have like a special presentation on that.
I think it sounds interesting. I'll look her up and see if she wouldn't mind coming and doing something on that, because I think it's a really interesting avenue to explore. I was just going to open it up and ask you all who are here what else you would like to see. Like if we do more of these, what types of demos would you like us to do?
I was thinking maybe we did a microwave one, and then we did a one-pot one. So we could do a kind of a recipes without heat or something like that. If you don't even have access to a microwave, or you want to stay in your room like that night for a reason or another, what can you do to make sure that you're still eating healthy in a cheap way or something like that? That's one idea that we could do.
So no cook meals.
Right. I guess, yeah, no cooking, just preparations or something like that. Walter, do you have a special request?
I mean, so my wife is vegetarian, and she's really opened my eyes to what you can do with a salad. So I used to think that, all the chopping was just like so much work, but now I'm seeing like, one, how you can chop really well, and then two, like all the amazing ingredients you can put into a salad. I think there's a lot of creativity there. So that might be a fun one.
So we could also do one just on knife skills if we wanted to do one on, different ways to cut all the different fruits and vegetables. That'd be a great one to have recorded so people could refer back to it. Would be happy to